For an entire week every morning, my wife left the house carrying a container of homemade soup and quietly said, "Our grandson still has a fever. I'll be home before dinner." I believed her every single time. Then, on a cool Monday morning, I brought an apple pie and a box of toys to my son's house, hoping to surprise them. But the moment I stepped into the yard, I heard cheerful laughter instead of silence. I froze outside the kitchen window when I heard my son whisper, "He still doesn't suspect a thing. I'm so grateful you chose to spend your time with this story. Now tell me something, what city or country are you joining us from today? Leave it in the comments. Let's see how far this reaches. Please know some details here are fictionalized for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to specific people or places is coincidental, but the meaning behind every word is something I hope stays with you." The morning I drove to my son's house with an apple pie and a box of building blocks, I had no idea it would be the last time I ever looked at my family the same way again. It started the way most ordinary Mondays do in Savannah. Humid air, the smell of pine and morning dew, the kind of golden October light that makes you believe the world is still a decent place. I'd been up since 6, same as always. Made my coffee, sat on the porch for a while. Watched the neighbor's dog trot down the sidewalk like he owned the whole street. Maggie had already left by 7:30, same as she'd done every morning that week, her canvas tote bag heavy with containers of food she'd cooked the night before. Cody's still running a fever. She'd told me at breakfast, spooning oatmeal into her bowl without looking up. "I'll be back before dinner." I'd nodded, told her to drive safe, and meant it. For 7 straight days, I'd believed every word. But that Monday, I decided to surprise her. The apple pie was from Henderson's Bakery on Bull Street. Maggie's favorite, the kind with the lattice crust and a dusting of cinnamon sugar on top. The building blocks were from the toy store 2 blocks over, one of those old-fashioned wooden sets that Cody had pointed at the last time I took him shopping. I figured a 6-year-old could use some cheering up. I figured wrong. I pulled into Derek's driveway just before 9, cut the engine, and reached for the bags on the passenger seat. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Not the weak, sleepy kind you'd expect from a child who'd spent a week in bed with a fever. This was full, bright, uninhibited laughter, the kind that bounces off walls and spills out through open windows. I stepped out of the car, slowly, bags still in hand, and stood there on the driveway listening. Cody came tearing around the side of the house. A second later, a soccer ball under his arm. His cheeks flushed red, not from fever, but from running. He was wearing his Spider-Man sneakers. He was grinning from ear to ear. "Grandpa," he spotted me before I could move. "What are you doing here? It's a mouse and more pulpers for support." My chest tightened in a way I hadn't expected. I crouched down and opened my arms, and he ran straight into them the way he always did, all bony elbows and wild energy. I hugged him back and held on a second longer than usual. "Brought you something?" I said, keeping my voice easy. "Heard you weren't feeling well." Cody pulled back and wrinkled his nose. "I feel great. I've been practicing my corner kicks. Want to see?" I looked at him, really looked at him. Bright eyes, pink cheeks, not a trace of illness anywhere on that little face. My throat went dry. "Maybe in a minute, buddy," I said. "Is your dad home?" "Yeah, he's inside with Grandma. They're talking in the kitchen." I set the bags down on the front step and put a finger to my lips. "Don't tell them I'm here yet, okay? I want to surprise them." Cody pressed his lips together with delight, nodded dramatically, and ran back toward the yard. I straightened up, exhaled slowly, and walked along the side of the house toward the kitchen window, the one that always sat half open because Derek never bothered fixing the latch on the screen. Their voices reached me before I got there. "He still doesn't suspect anything." Derek's voice, low, relaxed, the same voice he used when he was closing a real estate deal and feeling good about it. "Are you sure, Maggie?" Quieter, a thread of something tight running through it. "Positive. He thinks you're up here nursing Cody every day. He's got no reason to think otherwise." A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Just a few more days. He'll sign it without even knowing what it is." I pressed my back against the siding. My hand gripped the window ledge. The wood was rough and warm from the morning sun. "And if he refuses?" Maggie asked. Derek's voice dropped a fraction, cooled in that particular way it did whenever he stopped bothering to perform warmth. "Then we go to plan B." There was a silence after that, the kind that fills itself up with everything no one is willing to say out loud. I stood outside that window for what felt like a long time. The October sun was warm on my face. A mockingbird was going through its repertoire in the magnolia tree by the fence. Cody's soccer ball thumped rhythmically against the side of the garage. Everything around me was exactly the way it always was. And yet, in the space of 2 minutes, the entire architecture of my life had developed a crack I didn't know how to measure. The woman who'd slept beside me for 41 years. The son I'd driven to Little League games and helped move into his first apartment and danced with at his wedding. Talking in a kitchen that smelled like the coffee cake Maggie always made on Monday mornings, planning something they couldn't say to my face. I walked back to the front step. I picked up the bags, the pie, the building blocks. I set them down again just inside the front door where they'd be found, and I walked back to my car without making a sound. I didn't call out, didn't knock, didn't go inside. I just sat behind the wheel for a moment, with both hands resting in my lap, looking at the house I had helped Derek and Stacy pick out 12 years ago. The house I had co-signed the original mortgage on when the bank needed more collateral. The house where my grandson was currently kicking a soccer ball around a yard, healthy as a horse, while someone inside used his supposed illness as cover for whatever it was they were building against me. I started the engine. The whole drive home, one question turned over and over in my head, slow and relentless as a millstone. Sign what? I got home before Maggie did. I parked in the garage, walked through the side door into the kitchen, and stood there for a moment in the middle of the room, just stood there looking at the house I had built with my own 2 hands. Not metaphorically, literally. I had poured the foundation of this place in the summer of 1987, working weekends alongside 2 college friends who owed me favors. I had framed the walls, laid the subflooring, run the electrical in the master bedroom myself, because the contractor quoted me 3 times what I thought was reasonable. Every room in this house had a memory attached to it that went deeper than wallpaper or paint. The kitchen smelled like 30 years of Sunday mornings. The hallway still had the scuff marks where Derek used to drag his hockey bag down to the car. I walked to the armchair by the front window, the one I'd had reupholstered twice, and refused to throw out no matter how many times Maggie suggested it, and I sat down. I could see the driveway from there. I used to sit in that same spot when Derek was a teenager watching for his headlights whenever he came home past curfew. Old habits. I sat there for 2 hours and 40 minutes before Maggie's Buick turned into the drive. She came through the front door humming something under her breath, the canvas tote over one arm, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She looked the way she always looked, coming home from Derek's, a little tired, a little satisfied, the way women look when they've spent a day doing something they consider useful. "You're home early," she said, hanging her keys on the hook by the door. "Didn't go far today." I kept my voice level. "How's Cody?" She set the tote down and moved toward the kitchen. "Better, I think. His color's coming back. I made him that chicken soup with the little stars, you know how he likes that." "That's good," I said. "He was asking about me." "Of course he was. He always asks about you." She called back from the kitchen, the sound of cabinets opening and closing. "You hungry? I've got leftover pot roast from yesterday." "I'm fine." I pushed myself out of the chair and followed her into the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe. "Sit with me for a bit." She turned and gave me a small, slightly puzzled smile. "Since when do you ask?" "Since today." She laughed a comfortable, easy laugh and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. I sat across from her and we talked about the weather, about the gutters that needed cleaning before winter, about whether we should invite the Prestons over for Thanksgiving this year. Normal things. The kind of conversation that fills a Tuesday evening without leaving any marks. The whole time I watched her hands. Maggie has beautiful hands, always has. Long fingers, neat nails, a few age spots now that she's 68, but still graceful the way they move when she's talking, emphasizing a word here, smoothing the tablecloth there. I had watched those hands for 41 years. I knew them better than I knew my own. That night, watching them wrap around her mug of chamomile tea, I tried to find something different in them. Some sign of guilt, some tremor of betrayal. They looked exactly the same. After dinner, she washed the dishes. I dried. We didn't need to talk during that part. We'd done it so many times that the silence between us had its own comfortable rhythm, the clinking of plates, the soft run of water, the particular sound the dish rack made when you set a heavy pan down on it. 40 years of evenings compressed into muscle memory. I folded my dish towel over the oven handle and told her I was heading to bed early. She reached up and patted my cheek the way she always did. "You feeling all right, Walt? You seem quiet." "Just tired," I told her. She believed me. Why wouldn't she? I lay in the dark for a long time, after she fell asleep staring up at the ceiling. Maggie breathed the slow, steady way she always did, She'd never had trouble sleeping, not once in all the years I'd known her. She slept now, with her hand curled near her chin, her hair loose on the pillow, exactly the way she had at 26, at 40, at 60. I turned my head and looked at her profile in the dark. Sign what? The question had followed me all the way home, and it had no intention of leaving. I ran through everything I owned in my head, the house, the retirement accounts, the savings bonds, the inherited acre of land in Effingham County my father had left me. Derek knew about all of it. Derek had always known about all of it, because I had believed there was no reason to keep anything from family. The word settled in my chest like a stone. Plan B. Whatever Plan A was, I hadn't agreed to it, which meant somewhere out there my son had already thought past my refusal, had already mapped the route around me, had already sat in his kitchen and decided that if his father wouldn't cooperate, there were other ways to get where he wanted to go. I lay there until the clock on the nightstand read 2:15 in the morning. Then slowly, quietly, so as not to wake Maggie, I made a decision. Tomorrow morning, I would leave the house 20 minutes before she did. I would not go where I told her I was going. I would park 2 blocks from Derek's house, and I would watch the way an engineer watches a structure he suspects is compromised, looking for the fault line, finding the exact place where something load-bearing has gone wrong. 40 years of trusting. Starting tomorrow, I was going to start reading the blueprints. I left home 20 minutes before Maggie did that, Tuesday morning, telling her I was swinging by Phil's pharmacy on Habersham Street to pick up my blood pressure prescription before it ran out. She nodded, told me to drive safe, and went back to wrapping up her containers of food, without a second thought. That was the first lie I had told my wife in 41 years of marriage. Standing at the front door with my keys in my hand, I felt the weight of it settle somewhere behind my sternum, a dull, uncomfortable pressure that had nothing to do with my heart condition. I did it anyway. Walked out, started the truck, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I took the back roads through the Ardsley Park neighborhood, cutting across 38th Street and coming around through the quiet stretch of Pinewood Lane, a shaded residential block that ran parallel to the back of Derrick Street and gave me a clean sightline to his front door without putting me anywhere near his driveway. I parked under a pecan tree, cut the engine, and reached into the back seat for the canvas fishing bag I keep behind the driver's seat. The binoculars were tucked in the side pocket. Zeiss, 8x42, S, the good glass. I'd bought them 12 years ago for watching ospreys out on the Ogeechee River, and they'd never let me down once. I cracked the window for air, raised the binoculars, and got my first clear look at Derek's house in the early morning light. Maggie arrived at 8:06. I watched her pull into the driveway in her silver Buick Climb, out slowly the way she always did. She'd had that left knee trouble since her 60s and disappear through the front door with her tote bag hanging off one arm. The house absorbed her. The blinds on the front windows stayed drawn. No sign of a sick child anywhere. No sound carrying across the still morning air that might suggest illness or distress of any kind. I lowered the binoculars and exhaled through my nose. At 8:47, a black Mercedes S-Class turned onto the street and pulled directly to the curb in front of Derek's house. The driver took his time getting out. A man, in his mid-50s, well-built, salt and pepper hair, combed back from a broad forehead. He was wearing a charcoal suit that had been cut for him, specifically the kind of tailoring that didn't come from a department store rack. He reached back into the car with one deliberate movement and extracted a leather briefcase so overstuffed that the brass clasps strained against their locks. My stomach dropped straight through the seat. I knew that face. Gerald Fitch. 3 years ago, Derek had brought him to Sunday dinner at our house, introduced him around the table with that particular pride men use when they want you to know they've moved up in the world. Our estate attorney, Derek, had called him, emphasizing the word estate, the way you emphasize a word when you want the people around you to feel its weight. We'd shaken hands, made 10 minutes of polite conversation about the Braves' pitching rotation, eaten 2 helpings of Maggie's pot roast, and I hadn't given the man another thought since. Watching him now through my binoculars, I gave him a great deal of thought. Fitch walked up Derek's front path without hesitation. No pause at the door, no checking of an address, no ring of the bell. He knocked twice with the side of his fist, quick and proprietary, and the door opened before the second knock had fully landed. Derek had been waiting for him on the other side of that door. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I noted the time on my phone, 8:49 a.m. Then I sat and watched. At 9:12, a second vehicle arrived. Silver Audi current model, Georgia plates. The driver was younger, late 40s, moving quickly. wearing a navy vest over a blue button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was carrying a messenger bag over one shoulder and a rolled tube of what appeared to be large-format documents under his opposite arm, the kind of tube architects use or surveyors or people who deal in property maps. He did not ring the bell either. He walked straight to the door, turned the handle, and went inside. The door had been left unlocked specifically for him. I photographed both license plates with my phone, holding it steady against the window frame, the way I used to hold a level against a wall, patient steadiness, no wasted motion. My hands did not shake. My hands almost never shake. It is one of the few advantages of spending 40 years doing precise work with your hands. The body learns to stay calm, even when everything else in you is screaming. But inside, something was screaming. I sat in that truck for 1 hour and 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire time, marking every minute the way you mark measurements on a job site. At 10:30, Fitch came back out through the front door. He was still carrying his briefcase in his left hand, but now his right hand held a manila folder thick enough to need a rubber band around it. The folder looked freshly assembled. The rubber band was new, still had that bright orange color before it gets stretched and faded from use. The man with the rolled documents came out directly behind him, messenger bag re-slung over his shoulder, the document tube conspicuously absent. He'd left whatever was inside it behind. He said something to Fitch as they reached the sidewalk, and Fitch threw his head back and laughed the relaxed, expansive laugh of a man who has just accomplished something he's satisfied with. I raised my phone and photographed them both face on, clear as day in the October morning light. When I finally reached for the ignition, I stopped. Across the street from Derek's house, a woman was standing on the front porch of a white bungalow, small frame, white haircut, close wearing a fleece vest the color of pine needles. She had a coffee mug cradled in both hands, and she was looking directly at my truck, not the casual glance of someone noticing a parked vehicle. She was looking at me with the focused, settled attention of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is not at all surprised that it has arrived. She raised one hand slowly off her mug and gave me a single deliberate nod. Every reasonable instinct I had told me to pull out and go home, to think before I acted, to be careful. I turned off the engine and got out of the truck. The morning air hit me as I stepped onto the pavement, cool and damp, carrying the smell of cut grass and chimney smoke from somewhere down the block. Georgia in October has a particular kind of quiet to it, the kind that makes every footstep sound deliberate. Mine felt exactly that way as I crossed the street toward the white bungalow. The woman hadn't moved from her porch. She watched me come with the unhurried patience of someone who had lived long enough to know that rushing things never improved them. "You're Walt Harmon," she said when I reached the bottom of her porch steps. Still not a question. "That's right." I stopped at the base of the steps, hands at my sides. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't, but Derek mentioned you plenty of times when we'd wave hello across the street. Talked about his father, the engineer, like it was something to be proud of." She tilted her head slightly. "Name's Dorothy Calloway. I've lived on this block for 34 years. Come inside, I have something you need to see, and I am not going to say it, standing on the porch where anybody driving by can watch us talking." She turned and went through her front door without waiting for my answer. I followed her in. Dorothy's house was the kind of home that tells you everything about the person who lives in it without a single word being spoken. Bookshelves overflowing in every direction, paperbacks stacked horizontally on top of vertical rows because there was simply no more vertical space. A large tabby cat occupying the entire arm of a blue sofa, as though it had been placed there by an interior decorator. On the mantelpiece, a wedding photograph from what looked like the early 70s, a younger Dorothy laughing at something happening just outside the frame, a broad-shouldered man with sideburns grinning beside her. The house smelled like coffee and old paper, and something baking slowly in the oven. She set a mug in front of me at the kitchen table and sat down across from me without fuss. "How long have you known?" I asked her. "Known something was wrong." Dorothy wrapped both hands around her mug. "About 6 weeks. Known it involved you specifically." She paused. "Since last Thursday when I saw your name on a file folder being carried out of that house." My breath caught in my chest like a fish on a hook. "Tell me everything you sagt. The reportuan boors," I said. She reached across the table and pulled a large iPad toward her, the screen already bright and open to a video app. "I installed a Ring doorbell camera 2 years ago," she said. "After a porch pirate took 3 packages off my front step in the same week, the camera covers my entire front porch and a wide angle of the street. both sidewalks, both driveways. She turned the screen to face me. It saves everything automatically to the cloud. 30 days of footage always. I never delete anything. She pressed play on the first clip. The timestamp read 7 days ago, 8:14 a.m. The image was sharper than I'd expected from a doorbell camera, high-definition wide lens, the kind of clarity that doesn't leave much room for doubt. I watched Maggie's silver Buick pull into Derek's driveway. Watched my wife of 41 years climb out, adjust her tote bag on her shoulder, and walk through the front door. Through the side window of Derek's living room, visible at the edge of the frame, I could see Cody running back and forth across the room, with what looked like a toy airplane in each hand, a picture of health and energy that made my chest ache with a specific focused pain. "Your grandson," Dorothy said quietly. "He was supposed to be sick," I said. My voice came out flat. "All week Maggie told me he was running a fever." Dorothy pressed her lips together and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. She swiped to the next clip, Gerald Fitch arriving at 8:49 the previous Tuesday, the same morning I'd been parked 2 blocks away watching through my binoculars. But Dorothy's camera had caught something my binoculars had missed the moment Fitch turned back toward the street after knocking his briefcase open on Derek's front step, pulling out a document and checking the top page. Even at the angle, I could see it was a multi-page legal form with signature lines running down the right margin. "That man's been there 4 times in the past 2 weeks, Dorothy said. "Always with papers. Always leaves with papers that look different from the ones he brought in." "His name is Gerald Fitch," I said. "He's a lawyer. Derek introduced him to me as their estate attorney a few years back." Dorothy nodded, slowly filing the information away. "And the other one, the younger man who came this morning, I don't know him yet." I slid my phone across the table and showed her the license plate photos I'd taken. "But I've got his plates." Dorothy looked at the photos and then back at me with something close to approval. "I've got those too," she said, along with his face clear and time-stamped. She swiped again. "His name is Marcus Webb. I looked him up online after his 3rd visit. He's a licensed real estate agent out of Pooler, specializes in what the listing calls estate property acquisition and transfer." She let the phrase sit between us for a moment. "That means he helps people take ownership of properties that are changing hands, usually in situations involving elderly owners, estates, or guardianship arrangements." The word guardianship landed in my gut like a stone dropped into deep water, heavy sinking, creating ripples that hadn't finished spreading yet. "There's one more," Dorothy said. She swiped to a clip from 5 days ago. A white sedan, plain and forgettable, pulled up at 9:47 a.m. The man who got out was in his late 50s, carrying only a slim leather folder. He moved with the distracted efficiency of someone who visits a lot of different addresses in a single day, checking the house number before knocking, adjusting his collar, not particularly interested in his surroundings. Something about him nagged at me immediately. The forward lean when he walked, the way he held the leather folder flat against his body rather than swinging it at his side. I had seen those mannerisms before, in a clinical setting, across a desk covered in pamphlets about cholesterol and blood pressure management. "I've seen him," I said slowly. My mouth had gone completely dry. "Maggie made my appointments, 8 months of them. She called them routine checkups." Dorothy set her mug down on the table with a soft, careful sound. "He came out carrying a folder with your name on the tab," she said. "I saw it plain as anything when he turned toward his car. Large letters, Walter Harmon." She held my gaze without wavering. "I don't know what's in that folder, Walt, but I know it has your name on it, and I know it came out of your son's house, and I know that whatever is happening across that street is moving fast, and it is not moving in your favor." My hands pressed flat against the tabletop. The wood was solid and cool beneath my palms. I focused on the realness of it, the physical certainty of something I could actually feel, because everything else in that moment felt like it was dissolving at the edges. "I've saved every clip," Dorothy said. "Backed up to 3 separate drives and the cloud. Time-stamped, unedited exactly as the camera recorded it." She reached across and briefly covered my hands with hers. A quick, firm grip, the kind that says, "I am not going anywhere. Whatever you decide to do with this, I will back you up. 34 years on this block. I know what decent looks like, and I know what wrong looks like, and what's happening in that house across the street is wrong." I looked at this woman, this neighbor I had never met, who had no stake in my family's troubles, who could have closed her blinds and minded her own business every morning for 6 weeks and chosen not to. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. Dorothy, I said carefully, the man from the clinic on Drayton Street. What else did you notice when he left? She reached over, swiped once more, and zoomed in on the final frame of the clip, the man turning toward his white sedan, the leather folder tucked under his arm. My name on the tab, capital letters perfectly legible. He looked relieved, Dorothy said quietly. The way people look when they've done something they're not proud of and they're glad it's over for the day. I stared at that folder on the screen, at my own name in someone else's hands coming out of my own son's house on a Tuesday morning, while I sat at home thinking everything was fine. The ripples from that stone were still spreading, and I was only beginning to understand how deep the water went. I drove straight from Dorothy's house to Drayton Street without stopping. The Victorian clinic with its white trim and brass placard appeared around the corner, exactly where it always had, Raymond Schultz M.D. Family Medicine, and I pulled into the small parking lot with my jaw already set. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. A young mother bounced a fussy toddler on her knee. An older gentleman with a fishing magazine hadn't turned a page in what looked like 20 minutes. The receptionist behind the glass partition, a woman in her early 30s with a phone headset, clipped over one ear, looked up when I approached and gave me the automatic smile she probably gave everyone. Mr. Harmon, did you have an appointment today? I don't see you on Cis Girls. I don't have an appointment. I kept my voice easy pleasant the way I always spoke when I needed something from someone who was about to resist giving it to me. I'm here to request a complete copy of my medical records. Every visit, every note, everything in my file going back to my first appointment here. The smile thinned. She straightened in her chair. Oh, well, typically Dr. Schultz likes to be present when patients make that kind of request, just so he can walk you through. Under the HIPAA privacy rule, I said, I have the federal right to request and receive copies of my own medical records without needing my physician's permission or presence. The practice has 30 days to comply, but I'd appreciate whatever you can print today. I smiled again warmly. I'm retired. I've got nowhere to be. She excused herself and vanished through the back door. I took a chair by the window, where I could watch both the entrance and the hallway. The toddler across the room fixed me with a long, solemn stare. I crossed my eyes at him. He dissolved into laughter. His mother looked up startled, then smiled. On a different Tuesday in a different version of my life that would have made my whole morning. The receptionist returned 12 minutes later with a manila envelope and a form. Everything's in there. She said, her voice noticeably cooler than when I'd walked in. If you have any questions about the notes, Dr. Schultz would be happy to schedule a time to... I'm sure I can manage, I said. Thank you for your help. I signed the receipt form, tucked the envelope under my arm, and walked back out to my truck. I read every page sitting in the driver's seat, windows down, the October air moving through the cab. I started at the beginning and went straight through line by line, the way I used to read structural load calculations on job sites, not assuming anything was accurate until I'd checked it myself. By page 2, my hands had started to shake. Patient demonstrates mild but consistent short-term memory impairment. Difficulty recalling recent events during interview. Recommend continued monitoring for early-stage cognitive decline. I read that sentence 4 times. I remembered that exact appointment Schultz had asked me routine questions about sleep and diet. I had answered everyone without hesitation, and he had written down that I was losing my mind. I kept going. Patient unable to recall the name of his primary care physician prior to joining this practice. My throat tightened like a wire being pulled taut. I'd told him I couldn't remember the name off the top of my head. It had been over a year since I'd seen the man. That is not memory loss. That is Tuesday. Patient exhibited confusion regarding dates during examination. I had made a joke, said I always had to check my phone mid-month like everybody else. He had laughed, and then written it down as a symptom of cognitive decline. I was still staring at the last page when I heard the side door of the clinic swing open. Schultz walked out into the parking lot between patients the way he apparently did, moving with the distracted half-attention of a man whose mind was already on the next appointment. He was maybe 15 feet from my truck when he looked up and saw me. What happened to his face in that moment was not something he could have controlled even if he'd tried. The color dropped out of it entirely. Not a gradual fade, but a sudden complete erasure, like someone had reached in and turned off a switch. His leather folder slipped against his hip. He caught it awkwardly. Mr. Harmon. His voice came out carefully measured, each word placed like a foot testing thin ice. I didn't realize you had a... I didn't. I held up the open records so he could see his own handwriting clearly from where he stood. Just picking up some light reading. He took a half step forward, then stopped. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Those notes, there's context to them that isn't always obvious from the written summary alone. If you'd like to come back inside, I can explain. Explain what exactly? I kept my voice very quiet. Quiet was more frightening than loud, and I knew it. Explain how a man who answered every question you asked him, clearly and completely, came out of your office diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Explain how forgetting a doctor's name counts as memory impairment. Explain what my son paid you to write in this file. Schultz went absolutely rigid. His face, already pale, took on a gray cast that made him look genuinely unwell. I don't know what you think, he started. I said, that you know exactly what I think, and I think you should probably talk to a lawyer before this goes any further. I put the records back in the envelope, started the truck, pulled out of the parking lot without looking at him again. But in the rearview mirror, I watched him stand motionless in the middle of the lot, still holding that leather folder against his hip, staring after my truck with the expression of a man who has just realized the ground underneath him is considerably less solid than he thought. The word came out of me on the highway, spoken aloud to no one, low and certain. Guardianship, not a question anymore, a conclusion. They were building a legal case to bring before a judge, a case that would declare Walter Harmon mentally incompetent, strip him of his right to manage his own affairs, and hand Derek full legal control over everything I had spent 40 years earning. My hands gripped the wheel, my knuckles went white. That evening, I sat in my study alone, and I started pulling out the financial records. I spread 4 months of bank statements across my desk and started reading the way a man reads something he already suspects is going to ruin his evening slowly, with his jaw locked and his stomach braced. Maggie had managed our household finances for most of our marriage, not because I couldn't. I ran payroll on job sites for 30 years, but because she liked doing it and I trusted her completely. Those two facts sitting together in my chest that Tuesday night felt like the setup to a joke I was never going to find funny. I was on the third statement when I found the first withdrawal. $9,200, cash, mid-morning, a branch on Victory Drive. I kept reading. $8,800, cash, a branch on Eisenhower Drive. $9,500, an ATM on Abercorn Street, 8:15 in the morning. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing numbers down the left margin. My handwriting, usually neat from decades of drafting work, came out slightly uneven. My hand wasn't entirely steady. When I added the column, I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. $47,300. Gone from the account I shared with my wife, withdrawn in careful increments that never once crossed the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, the line above which banks are legally required to file an automatic report with the government. Someone had known exactly where that line was and stayed deliberately consistently below it. I was still staring at that number when Maggie came to the study doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. Walt, dinner's getting cold. She looked at the papers spread across the desk, and her expression shifted just slightly, just around the eyes. What are you working on? Old statements, I said, trying to track down a charge I couldn't remember making. She leaned against the doorframe, tilting her head with that familiar look of mild concern she always wore when she thought I was overcomplicating something simple. Which charge? I can probably tell you exactly what it was. I'm sure you can, I said. I looked at her steadily. Give me a few more minutes. Something moved across her face, too quick to name gone before I could read it. She nodded and went back to the kitchen. I closed the folder and locked it in the filing cabinet for the first time in 25 years. The next morning, I was at First National Bank on Abercorn Street when the doors opened at 9. The branch manager was a woman named Janet Reeves, 40s, sharp eyes, the efficient manner of someone who had answered difficult questions before and didn't mind answering them again. I had met her briefly at a neighborhood association meeting a couple of years back. She recognized me when her assistant brought me to her office. Mr. Harmon, she extended a hand across the desk. What can I do for you today? I need to review the transaction history on our joint checking account, I said. Specifically, I want to see the authorization signatures on every cash withdrawal over $5,000 in the past 6 months. Janet's expression stayed professional, but something behind it became more attentive. Of course, that's your right as a joint account holder. She turned to her computer, typed for a moment. Can I ask, is there a specific concern you'd like to flag? I'd like to see the signatures first, I said. Then we can talk about what concerns me. She printed the records and slid them across the desk. I went through them one by one. Every withdrawal, all 12 of them, carried Maggie's signature, her handwriting unmistakably, not forged, not pressured, at least not on paper. Mrs. Harmon is also an authorized account holder, Janet said carefully, watching my face. These withdrawals are technically within her rights as a joint holder. I understand that, I said. What I want to know is whether the pattern of these withdrawals, always under $10,000, always cash across multiple branch locations, is something your compliance department would consider structuring. Janet's posture changed, subtly, but I caught it, the slight straightening, the new precision in her expression. Structuring, she said, is when a person deliberately breaks up transactions to stay below federal reporting thresholds. It's a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act, regardless of whether the money itself is obtained legally. I know what it is, I said. I'm asking whether what's in front of you looks like it. She studied the printout for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, and her voice dropped half a register. Mr. Harmon, I'm going to suggest that you speak with our fraud and compliance officer before you leave today. And I'd strongly recommend that you consult with a personal attorney as well, separate from any attorney associated with your household. She paused. For your own protection. My throat tightened. The fact that this woman who owed me nothing, who had met me exactly once, was now looking at me with that particular careful concern, told me everything about how clearly the picture in front of us read. One more thing, I said. I'd like to open a separate individual account today. My name only, no joint holder. Janet nodded, already reaching for a form. Of course, we can take care of that right now. I transferred a significant portion of my personal retirement funds into the new account before I left the bank. My savings bonds, my Effingham County land documents. I had already called my accountant from the parking lot to make sure every move was clean documented and legally beyond dispute. Walking back to my truck, I checked my phone. There was a text message from Derek sent at 8:53 that morning, cheerful and easy, the way his texts always were when he wanted something. Hey Dad, can you stop by this weekend? Got some paperwork I need your help with. Nothing major, just want to get it sorted before the end of the month. I stood in the parking lot and read it twice, then a third time. Nothing major. He had no idea I had spent the last 24 hours dismantling everything he'd built. He had no idea his father had spent 40 years learning to read the exact moment a structure was about to fail. I typed back slowly, one thumb, keeping my reply as warm and ordinary as I could manage. Sounds good, son. I'll come by Sunday. I put the phone in my pocket, got in the truck, and sat there for a moment, with both hands resting on the wheel, the engine idling. The hearing was still weeks away. I had time, but not the kind that forgave carelessness. I needed to figure out exactly how deep this went, and that evening, standing in the bathroom before bed, reaching for my blood pressure medication on the shelf above the sink, I noticed something that stopped my hand midair. The pills in the bottle were a different color than they had been last week. They had always been white, small, round, chalky white. These were pale yellow. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours that night. By 5:30 in the morning, I was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with the pill bottle in front of me, inside a Ziploc bag I'd taken from the kitchen drawer. I hadn't touched the pills with my bare hands after I'd noticed the color. I hadn't taken any of them the night before, either just set the bottle aside, told Maggie I'd forgotten to take them with dinner, and watched her accept that without a flicker of concern. Phil Garrett had owned the pharmacy on Habersham Street for going on 22 years. I'd been his customer for at least 15 of those. He knew my prescriptions the way a good mechanic knows an engine he's been servicing for years. The kind of man who remembered your name without looking at the computer, who called you when something in your refill history looked off. I trusted Phil the way you trust a man who has given you no reason not to. I drove to the pharmacy before 6 and knocked on the rear entrance. Phil answered in his pharmacist's coat with a coffee mug in hand, clearly just arrived himself. He took one look at my face and opened the door without asking questions. "Walt?" He stepped back to let me in. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." I held up the Ziploc bag. "I need you to look at something." His back office was small and smelled permanently of coffee and printer toner. He set his mug down, snapped on a pair of nitrile gloves, and took the bag from my hand. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly, studying the pills inside with the focused attention of a man who had spent 2 decades knowing exactly what every pill should look like. He didn't say anything for almost 30 seconds. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I'd heard all week. Then he set the bag down on his desk and looked at me, and the expression on his face made my heart drop straight into my stomach. "Walt," he said, and his voice had gone very careful the way voices go, when the person speaking is choosing every word deliberately. "These are not your blood pressure medication." My hands gripped the edge of his desk. "What are they?" "These appear to be furosemide." He tapped the outside of the bag with one gloved finger. "It's a loop diuretic, a strong one. It's used for fluid retention, congestive heart failure, certain kidney conditions. It is absolutely not what you're supposed to be taking." He paused. "And combined with the digoxin you take for your heart arrhythmia, taking this instead of your actual blood pressure medication, could cause severe hypotension, a dangerous drop in blood pressure. In a man your age, that means dizziness, fainting potential cardiac event." Another pause, heavier than the first. "Walt, if you'd been taking these for even a week without knowing, you could have collapsed. You could have had a stroke." The room tilted slightly. I held onto the desk harder. "How certain are you?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Certain enough that I'm not letting you leave this office until I make a phone call," Phil said. His jaw was set in the way I recognized from the man Phil Garrett did not say things he didn't mean. "This is not a dispensing error. This is not a manufacturing mix-up. These pills are a completely different medication, a different color, a different shape. Someone deliberately put them in your bottle." He looked at me over the rims of his glasses, and his eyes were angry in a way I hadn't seen from him before. "Who has access to your medications at home?" "Walt." I held his gaze. "My wife." Phil closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, they were still angry. But there was something else in them now, a grief almost for what he was being asked to understand. "And who else?" "Derek was at the house 3 weeks ago," I said. "He came by while I was out back in the garden. Maggie let him in. He would have been inside for at least 20 minutes. Phil pulled his phone off the desk. "I'm going to call this in to the Savannah-Chatham Metro Police. What they find on the pharmacy camera will tell us who switched those pills. Every customer and visitor gets recorded at the counter and in the consultation area." He looked at me directly. "Walt, I need you to understand what I'm saying. If somebody put these in your bottle deliberately, that is not a civil matter. That is attempted poisoning. That is a felony." The word landed in the room between us like something physical. "Make the call," I said. The officer who arrived 40 minutes later was a man named Detective Ray Colby, mid-40s, methodical, the kind of cop who listened more than he spoke and wrote things down in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil. He sat across from me in Phil's back office and asked his questions one at a time, giving each answer room to settle before he moved to the next. "Mr. Harmon," he said, "you mentioned there may be a broader pattern of financial irregularities and potential document fraud alongside this incident. Is that correct?" "That's correct." I laid out everything: the fabricated medical records, the $47,000, the footage from Dorothy's camera, Gerald Fitch, Marcus Webb, all of it. Colby wrote steadily, his expression giving nothing away. When I finished, he looked up from his notebook. "I want to ask you to do something that may feel counterintuitive," he said. "Going forward, I'm asking you not to confront anyone directly and not to let anyone know you've been here today. I understand you've already had one exchange with Dr. Schultz. We'll work with that. But from this point on, no more direct contact with anyone involved. If Schultz runs, we'll know it, and that itself becomes evidence. Right now, silence is your strongest move. If this is as organized as it appears, alerting the involved parties now could cause evidence to disappear very quickly." "I understand," I said. "We'll pull the pharmacy camera footage today," Colby said. "If someone switched those pills on these premises, we'll have them on video." He clicked his pencil closed and looked at me with something close to professional respect. "You've been very thorough, Mr. Harmon. Most people in your situation would have made a lot more noise by now." "And I'm an engineer," I said. "We don't make noise. We find the fault line first." Phil walked me to the back door when Colby had gone. He gripped my shoulder briefly, a short, firm press, the kind that carries more than words usually manage. "You should have come to me sooner," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "I didn't know sooner," I told him. He nodded. His eyes had gone a little bright, and he blinked it back the way men of our generation do. "You call me if you need anything, day or night. You hear me?" "I hear you, Phil." I walked to my truck in the early morning quiet. The sun was barely up, the air still cool and carrying the smell of river water from somewhere east of the city. I sat behind the wheel and checked my phone. Derek's text from yesterday was still on the screen. Nothing major, just want to get it sorted before the end of the month. I typed back slowly, one letter at a time. Sounds good, son. I'll come by Sunday. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home with both hands on the wheel and a cold settled fury burning somewhere behind my ribs that had no interest in going out anytime soon. By Friday afternoon, I had gotten very good at performing normalcy. I made coffee at the same time every morning, read the paper on the porch, came inside when Maggie called me for lunch, answered her questions about what I wanted for dinner with the same mild preferences I'd always had. From the outside, I imagine we looked exactly like what we had always been, a retired couple in their 70s, unhurried, comfortable, settled into the rhythms of a long life shared together. On the inside, I was doing something I hadn't done since my working years running calculations, constantly checking every variable looking for the load point where the whole structure would finally give. I was sitting in the living room that Friday afternoon, with a book open in my lap that I hadn't read a single page of when I shifted on the sofa cushion and felt something hard press against my hip. I reached down between the cushions and pulled out a small device, a children's smartwatch with a cracked screen on one corner and a Spider-Man sticker peeling off the back. Cody's. He'd left it the last time he visited, probably 2 weeks ago. The boy left something behind almost every visit, a sneaker, a juice box, a small plastic dinosaur that I'd found under the coffee table 3 times now. I almost set it on the end table and forgot about it. But the screen lit up when I touched it, which meant the battery still had charge. And in the top corner of the screen, a small icon was blinking a microphone symbol with a number beside it. 14 audio recordings. I stared at that icon for a long moment. The book slid off my lap onto the cushion beside me, and I didn't notice. Cody's watch had an auto-recording feature. I remember Derek mentioning it. When they first got the watch, said it was designed to capture voice commands and ambient sound, so kids could send voice messages to family members. The watch synced automatically to the family's home Wi-Fi at Derek's house, saving recorded files to the cloud. When Cody forgot the watch at our place and it connected to our Wi-Fi, instead, the saved files downloaded directly to the watch's local storage. Apparently, it had been recording for weeks and storing everything it caught. My hands were not entirely steady when I plugged the watch into the charging cable on the side table and pressed play on the first file. The recording was poor quality, the ambient hiss of an indoor room, the distant sound of a television. Then Derek's voice close to the microphone, low and even. Okay, buddy, let's practice again. When somebody asks you about Grandpa, what do you say? The air left my body. Cody's voice small and uncertain. That Grandpa forgets things a lot. That's right. Derek's voice patient and warm the way he sounded when he was teaching Cody to tie his shoes. And what else? A pause. That sometimes Grandpa gets angry, and it scares me. Perfect. The warmth in Derek's voice made my stomach turn. You're doing so well, buddy. But Daddy... Cody's voice dropped confused and a little troubled. Grandpa doesn't really scare me. Grandpa is nice. He makes me pancakes. I know he does. A brief pause. But this is important for Daddy. Okay? It's like a game. And when we play this game, it helps the whole family. Can you do that for me? A long, uncertain silence from Cody. Then, okay, Daddy, if it helps. I sat on that sofa and I could not move. I have been angry in my life, genuinely bone-deep angry, the kind of anger that comes from injustice and doesn't apologize for itself. I have been hurt in ways I thought I understood. But sitting in my own living room on a Friday afternoon, listening to my son use his 6-year-old boy as a rehearsed witness, coaching that child to say things about me that were not true, using the innocent trust of a little boy who made me pancakes in my mind as a weapon that was a kind of pain I did not have a name for yet. My eyes burned, my throat locked up completely. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there. I made myself keep listening. The second file was from a different day. Derek's voice again more businesslike this time, as though they'd moved past the introduction and into the details. Remember, if anyone asks, Grandpa gets confused about where he is sometimes, and he forgot your birthday last year. But Grandpa didn't forget my birthday. Cody said, his voice carrying a child's absolute certainty about facts. He took me to get ice cream. We had the kind with the sprinkles. I know. Impatience barely disguised under Derek's reasonable tone. But for the game, we say he forgot. Okay? A smaller voice this time, less willing. Okay. I stopped the recording. I sat there for a long time, with the watch in my hands, the cracked screen catching the afternoon light coming through the front window. Outside, a mockingbird was running through its full repertoire in the oak tree by the mailbox. The world outside that window was going about its Friday afternoon business, completely indifferent to what was happening in my living room. I was not crying. I was somewhere past crying, in a place where the grief was too large and too specific to come out as tears. It sat in my chest, instead enormous and immovable, pressing against my ribs from the inside. My son had sat down with his own child, looked that little boy in the face, and taught him to lie about his grandfather. Not for any reason a child could understand. For money, for property, for a house and a retirement account, and a piece of land in Effingham County that he had decided should belong to him before I was finished living. I copied all 14 audio files to my phone, every single one. Then I wound the charging cable back up, tucked it away, and placed the smartwatch back exactly where I'd found it, wedged between the sofa cushions, cracked screen down, Spider-Man sticker facing up. Cody would come looking for it eventually. I wanted it to be right where he'd left it. I stood up from the sofa and walked to the window. My legs felt strange, not weak exactly, but newly aware of themselves the way your body gets when it has absorbed something too large and is still deciding what to do with it. Outside, the mockingbird had moved on to a new song. I understood something clearly now that I had only partially understood before. This was not just about money. This was about erasing me, building a version of Walter Harmon piece by piece, document by document, coached word by coached word, from the mouth of a 6-year-old that would stand up in a courtroom and convince a judge that the real Walter Harmon no longer existed. They had been building that version of me for months. It was time I started building something of my own. We're right at the halfway point of this story, and I just want to pause for 1 second and say, if you're still here with me, type the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a single number, that's all I need to know. You haven't left. Because what's coming next, the meetings, the documents, the names I'm about to put on the table, it changes everything. Don't go anywhere. And a gentle note before we continue, some elements of this story have been shaped for narrative and educational purposes. If that's not something you'd like to hear, this is a comfortable place to step away, no judgment at all. Saturday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Savannah morning where the Spanish moss on the live oaks hangs lower than usual, and the air carries the particular dampness of rain that hasn't committed to falling yet. I put on the navy blazer Maggie had given me for our 39th anniversary, the good one, with the brass buttons she'd picked out herself, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, knotting my tie with hands that were steadier than the rest of me. Maggie appeared in the doorway behind me, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a dish towel folded over one arm. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "You're dressed up." "Antoine," I said, smoothing the tie against my chest. "Errand that needs a tie." She tilted her head the way she did when she wasn't entirely satisfied with an answer, but had decided not to push. "Will you be home for lunch?" "Shouldn't be long." I turned and kissed her on the cheek, brief, ordinary, the kind of kiss we'd exchanged 10,000 times in 41 years. She smelled like the hand lotion she kept by the kitchen sink. I held that in mind as I walked out the door because I needed something solid to hold on to. Attorney Carol Simmons kept her office on the 3rd floor of a converted federal-style building on Bull Street, the kind of Savannah building that had been 3 different things in its lifetime: a cotton broker's office, a dentist's practice, and now home to a woman whose gold leaf nameplate read Carol Simmons, J.D. Estate Planning, Probate, and Elder Law. I had found her through 3 phone calls the previous evening, my accountant, my old engineering firm, partner, and Phil Garrett, who knew her from a community legal aid board she sat on. All 3 said the same thing without coordinating sharp, straight, no nonsense. She was already at her desk when I arrived, which told me her assistant had flagged this as something other than routine. Carol Simmons was 60 maybe, 62, silver haircut, blunt at the jaw, reading glasses worn low on her nose, so she could look over them at people without tilting her head. She stood and shook my hand across the desk, dry, firm grip, no wasted motion. "Mr. Harmon," she said. "My assistant said this was urgent. Sit down and tell me everything." So I did. I talked for the better part of 40 minutes. I laid it out the way I would have presented a structural assessment. Start at the beginning, move in sequence, don't editorialize, let the facts carry their own weight. The week of false illness, the meetings at Derek's house, Gerald Fitch arriving with briefcases, Marcus Webb and his rolled property documents, Dorothy's Ring camera footage, Dr. Schultz's fabricated medical records, the $47,000. Withdrawn in careful increments below the federal reporting threshold, the switched blood pressure medication, and the 14 audio recordings on Cody's smartwatch where my son's patient-warm voice had coached a 6-year-old boy to lie about his grandfather. I put copies of every document on Carol's desk as I went. She read each one without interrupting her expression, giving away nothing, her pen moving occasionally across her legal pad. When I finished, she set down the last page and looked at me over her glasses for a long, measured moment. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "in 30 years of elder law practice, I have never had a client walk into this office this prepared. I spent 40 years reading blueprints," I said, "the skill transfers." This time the corner of her mouth moved all the way to a smile, brief and real. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and her voice shifted into something more direct. "What your son is pursuing is called a guardianship proceeding," she said. "In Georgia, to have a person declared legally incapacitated, the petitioner files a petition with the probate court, presents medical documentation of cognitive decline, and makes their case before a judge at a formal hearing. The court also appoints an independent evaluator, typically a physician or psychologist, to assess the subject separately. I've already spoken with the evaluator assigned to your case. Her assessment, based on an interview she conducted last week, found no evidence of cognitive impairment whatsoever." Carol tapped the medical file. "The fabricated records from Dr. Schultz are the entire foundation of Derek's case, and without them, he has nothing left to stand on." She tapped the medical file with one finger. "Without those records, he has nothing to bring before a judge. With what you've brought me today, those records don't just collapse, they become Exhibit A in a fraud case." "And the power of attorney?" I asked. "He's going to try to get me to sign something tomorrow." Carol's eyes sharpened. "Do not sign a single word. Not your initials, not your name, not a date. If he hands you a document, you tell him calmly that you'd like to take it home and review it carefully before signing anything. That is completely normal behavior for a man of sound mind, and it denies him the one thing he needs most right now." She wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. "I'm also going to connect you with an FBI forensic document examiner named Agent Rebecca Moss out of the Savannah field office. She specializes in question document analysis, forged signatures, altered legal instruments, fabricated records. Her findings will carry federal evidentiary weight that no state court can dismiss." I exhaled slowly through my nose. "How long does all of this take?" "Faster than you'd think given what you've assembled." Carol set down her pen and looked at me directly the way people look when they're about to say something they need you to actually hear. "Mr. Harmon, I want to say something about your wife." My chest tightened. What Derek did to Maggie, threatening her with a nursing home, using her fear of losing access to her grandson to force her cooperation, that is elder coercion under Georgia law. It is a criminal offense separate from the fraud. She paused. "Maggie bears responsibility for what she participated in, but she is also a victim of her own son. How you treat her going forward will matter to the legal case and to whatever your marriage looks like on the other side of this." The words landed somewhere deep and bruised. I looked at the surface of her desk for a moment, the neat files, the ceramic mug of pens, the yellow legal pads, and I thought about a woman who had slept beside me for 4 decades and had let fear make her into something I didn't recognize. "I understand," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Carol walked me to the door herself when we finished. She shook my hand again at the threshold and held it a beat longer than a formal handshake required. "You came to me with evidence," she said quietly. "Most people come to me with feelings. Evidence wins cases, Mr. Harmon. You've given us a very strong case." I rode the elevator down alone and walked out onto Bull Street into the gray October morning. I sat in my truck for a moment, both hands on the wheel, feeling the particular kind of exhausted that comes not from physical tiredness, but from having held something very heavy for a very long time. Then I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Derek's message from 2 days ago. "Sounds good, son. See you Sunday." I put the phone in my pocket, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. Tomorrow, I was going to sit across a table from my son and look him in the eye and pretend I knew nothing. I had spent 40 years building things that were meant to last. Tomorrow, I was going to find out how well I could hold myself together when everything I'd built was being dismantled from the inside. Sunday came, the way difficult days always seem, too bright, too ordinary. The kind of morning that has no business looking as peaceful as it does given what it's carrying underneath. I drove to Derek's house the same route I always took, down Abercorn, left on Victory, into the neighborhood, with its newer construction and wide driveways and young oak trees that hadn't had enough decades yet to grow into themselves. I parked in the same spot I always used, cut the engine, and sat there for exactly 30 seconds with my hands in my lap, running through everything Carol had told me the day before. Don't sign anything. Stay calm. Let him lead. Watch. I got out of the car and rang the doorbell like a man who had nothing on his mind except Sunday lunch. Stacy opened the door. Derek's wife, 41 years old, dark hair pulled back, wearing an apron that still had flour on it from whatever she'd been baking. She was a quiet woman, always had been the kind of person who observed more than she spoke. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Walt, come in, come in." She stepped back, wiping her hands on the apron. "Derek's in the living room. Lunch is almost ready." "Something smells incredible," I said, and I meant it. The house smelled of roasting garlic and something sweet from the oven. Under different circumstances, I would have felt genuinely welcome. Cody hit me like a small freight train from across the living room, wrapping both arms around my waist and pressing his face against my ribs. Grandpa's here." He tilted his head back and beamed up at me with the open, uncomplicated joy that only small children manage, and my heart cracked clean down the middle. I held on to him for a moment longer than I should have. "Hey there, buddy." I ruffled his hair. "You've been practicing those corner kicks." "Every single day," he said proudly. "Daddy says I'm getting better." "And Daddy's right about that one," I said. Derek came in from the back hallway, dressed casually khakis, a button down with the sleeves rolled, wearing the easy smile he deployed when he wanted something and was confident he was going to get it. He extended his hand and I shook it, and for one moment we looked at each other, and I held his gaze with everything I had, steady warm, giving him absolutely nothing. "Dad," he clapped me on the shoulder. "Good to see you. Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. Lunch was a masterpiece of ordinary family behavior. Stacy's roast chicken was as good as it smelled. Derek talked about a commercial property deal he was working on in Pooler, asked me questions about the garden, laughed at one of Cody's jokes with exactly the right amount of paternal delight. Maggie, who had arrived separately without telling me she was coming, sat at the far end of the table and barely touched her food, her eyes moving between me and Derek with an anxiety she was working hard to conceal. I ate well. I laughed where laughter was appropriate. I asked Stacy for her garlic recipe. After lunch, Derek said easily, "The way you suggest something completely natural. Hey, Dad, why don't we step into my office for a few minutes? I've got something I wanted to go over with you. Just some paperwork." "Of course," I said. His office was off the hallway, a tidy room with a large desk and framed real estate award certificates on the wall. He gestured to the chair across from the desk and sat down himself, pulling open the top drawer and removing a thick document held together with a black binder clip. "So," he set it on the desk and slid it across to me with the casual ease of a man passing a dinner menu. "This is just a durable power of attorney. It's something Carol, our family attorney, Gerald Fitch, recommended we get in order. Pretty standard stuff for estate planning at your age. It just means that if anything ever happened to you, Stacy and I could step in and manage things without any delay or court involvement." He smiled open and reassuring. "It's really just a protection for you, Dad." I picked up the document. I held it in both hands and read the first 3 pages slowly, my expression giving nothing away. The language was dense legal text, but I had read enough contracts in 40 years to understand what I was looking at. A full, unrestricted, durable power of attorney that would hand Derek complete control over every financial account, every property, and every medical decision the moment I signed it. I set it down on the desk and looked up at my son. "I appreciate you thinking ahead like this," I said. My voice was warm, measured, completely ordinary. "You mind if I take this home and read it through properly before I sign? My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I like to take my time with legal documents." Something moved across Derek's face fast, barely there gone before it fully formed. His jaw tightened a fraction, then released. "Of course," he said. "No rush at all." We went back to the living room. Cody was building something elaborate on the floor with a set of magnetic tiles narrating his construction project to himself, in a running commentary that made Stacy smile from the couch. I lowered myself into the armchair nearby and watched him work. Grandpa," Cody said, without looking up from his tiles, his voice carrying the conversational ease of a child who has no idea what he's about to say. Matters. Are you going to the old people's place? The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Stacy's head came up sharply. Derek, standing near the doorway with a coffee mug, went completely still. I kept my voice soft and even. What old people's place, buddy? Cody looked up, then his face open and curious, completely unbothered. The place with the white beds, where people go when they forget stuff. He tilted his head. Daddy said that's where you might go, and that after that, our house is going to be really big. Stacy made a small, strangled sound and pressed her hand over her mouth. Derek's coffee mug lowered very slowly toward the side table. I looked at my grandson, this 6-year-old boy with magnetic tiles in both hands and his grandfather's eyes, and not a deceptive bone in his entire body, and I felt something rise in my throat that I had to swallow hard to keep down. Nobody, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Cody nodded, satisfied, and went back to his tiles. Good, he said simply. Because who would make my pancakes? I stood, set my hands on my knees, and pushed myself to my feet. I gathered the power of attorney from the coffee table where I'd set it. I said my goodbyes to Stacy, who was staring at the floor, 2 bright spots of color burning in her cheeks. I hugged Cody long enough that he giggled and told me I was squeezing too hard. At the front door, Derek shook my hand. His hand was cold, and in his eyes behind the practiced composure, I saw something I hadn't seen there before, the first crack of genuine uncertainty, the look of a man whose plan has just developed a variable he didn't account for. I held his hand 1 beat longer than necessary and smiled at him, the way a father smiles at a son he has known since the boy drew his first breath. Last dark, good lunch, I said. Tell Stacy the chicken was perfect. I walked to my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, Derek was still standing in the open doorway watching me go. He didn't move until I turned the corner. The drive home was quiet. On the passenger seat beside me, the power of attorney document sat in its binder clip, every page unread by me, officially, every page understood by me completely. In 4 days, Agent Rebecca Moss would be sitting in Carol Simmons' office with a magnifying glass and a forensic light source examining every signature on every document Derek had prepared. I was already looking forward to that conversation. Carol called me Monday morning at 7:58 before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Walt. Her voice was clip precise, the voice of a woman delivering information, not conversation. Gerald Fitch filed the full guardianship petition with the probate court last Friday. They've scheduled the hearing, 3 weeks from this Thursday. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. My hand was steady. The rest of me was doing something I didn't have a word for yet. 3 weeks, I said. They're moving faster than I anticipated. A pause, which tells me they're either very confident or very nervous. Given what you've shown me, I suspect it's the latter. Another pause, shorter. Rebecca Moss can see us tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock my office. Bring everything. I'll be there, I said. Maggie came into the kitchen as I hung up, already dressed, her reading glasses on. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for the past 2 weeks, with a wariness underneath the ordinary morning expression, like a woman walking across ice she knows is thinner than it appears. Everything all right? She asked. That's fine, I said. Carol Simmons, she's helping me review some financial documents. Nothing to worry about. Maggie poured herself coffee and didn't say another word. But her hands wrapped around the mug were not quite steady. Agent Rebecca Moss arrived at Carol's office the next morning at 8:55, 5 minutes early, carrying a hard-sided equipment case in one hand and a slim laptop bag in the other. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s athletic build, dark blonde hair, pulled back, practically the kind of woman who moved through a room like she'd already assessed it twice before she walked in. She shook my hand with a brief, direct grip. Mr. Harmon. Her voice was efficient, not unkind. Carol's told me the outline. I'd like to hear the specifics from you directly before I look at the documents. So I told her. Short version this time, I'd gotten better at it. She listened without taking notes, which surprised me until I noticed her eyes were doing the work her pen wasn't tracking, cataloging, filing. When I finished, she opened her equipment case on Carol's conference table. Inside was an array of instruments I didn't recognize, a flat scanning device, 2 different light sources, a magnifying apparatus attached to a small camera, and a laptop, already running specialized software. The document in question, she said, is the will Gerald Fitch submitted to the probate court bearing your signature. She looked up at me. You've stated you never signed this document. I have never signed that document, I said. I have never seen that document. Rebecca nodded once and picked up the will with gloved hands. She placed it under the VSC, the video spectral comparator, she called it, a device that analyzed ink and paper under different light wavelengths invisible to the naked eye. What this does, she said, adjusting the instrument without looking up, is tell us whether different parts of a document were written at the same time with the same pen on the same paper. Legitimate signatures are made in a single session, same ink chemistry throughout. She studied the screen attached to the device. Forged or transplanted signatures show different ink aging patterns, different pressure indentations, sometimes different paper compression levels if the signature was physically cut and pasted. But in digital forgery, which is far more common, now we look at pixel-level analysis of the signature boundaries. She switched to her laptop and opened a forensic imaging program, enlarged the signature on the will to 400% on the screen. "Come look at this," she said. I walked around the table and looked at the screen. My own name blown up enormous, every curve of every letter visible in granular detail. "You see this edge?" Rebecca pointed with a stylus to the boundary of the signature against the paper. Genuine ink signatures have what we call feathering tiny fibers from the paper that the ink naturally bleeds into. It's invisible to the eye, but shows clearly under this magnification. She moved the stylus to a specific curve in the W of Walter. This signature has no feathering. The edges are digitally clean, perfectly bounded. That only happens when a signature image is copied from another document and placed onto this one electronically, then printed. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. "Can you tell where it came from?" Carol asked from across the table, leaning forward. "With the original documents to compare against, yes." Rebecca looked at me. "Do you have copies of documents you signed in 2019 or 2021, bank agreements, insurance forms, anything with your authentic signature from that period?" "Oh, I have everything," I said. 40 minutes later, after I'd retrieved the files from my truck and Rebecca had run her comparisons, she straightened up from the equipment and looked at both of us with the direct, unapologetic certainty of someone who deals exclusively in facts. "The signature on this will was taken from a bank loan modification agreement dated March 2019, she said. It was digitally extracted, scaled to fit, and placed onto the will document before printing. This is document fraud under federal statutes, specifically 18 U.S. Code, sections 10, 28, and 513. She removed her gloves and set them on the table. "Mr. Harmon, whoever did this committed a federal felony. This finding alone is enough to have the guardianship petition dismissed and referred for criminal prosecution." The room held that statement for a moment. Carol looked across at me, and for the first time since I'd walked into her office the previous Saturday, something in her expression shifted. Not satisfaction exactly, but the particular resolve of a lawyer who can now see the finish line clearly. "We have 3 weeks, she said. "That is more than enough." I gathered my documents and shook Rebecca's hand at the door. Her grip was as firm leaving as it had been arriving. "Mr. Harmon," she said, holding my hand a beat longer. "Whoever planned this assumed you wouldn't look closely enough to find it." A brief pause. They were wrong. I rode the elevator down alone, and on the drive home, Carol called again. Her voice carried something underneath it that made me pay close attention. "Walt," she said carefully, "there may be one more thing we need to discuss, about Maggie." Carol's words were still turning over in my mind when I pulled into our driveway that Tuesday evening. About Maggie. She hadn't elaborated on the phone, told me we'd talk tomorrow, but 41 years of marriage had given me a particular sensitivity to the weight of unfinished sentences, and Carol's had been heavy. I found Maggie in the kitchen, standing at the stove, stirring something she clearly wasn't paying attention to. The spoon moved in slow mechanical circles. The pot had stopped steaming. Whatever was in it had gone cold 10 minutes ago. I walked to the table and sat down. I placed 3 things on the surface in front of me: the bank statements, the printed pharmacy report from Phil, and a still frame Dorothy had sent me from the Ring camera footage showing Maggie sitting at Derek's dining table across from Gerald Fitch, a pen in her hand, signing a document. "Maggie," I said, "come sit with me." She turned from the stove. She saw what was on the table. The color left her face so completely and so quickly that I instinctively stood halfway up, afraid she might fall. But she didn't fall. She set the spoon down on the counter with a small, precise click, pulled out the chair across from mine, and sat down. Her hands went flat on the table in front of her, pressing down like she needed the surface to hold her up. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "At long enough," I said. "I need to hear it from you, all of it. Maggie looked at her own hands on the table. Her chin was trembling. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes had filled completely, and the tears spilled over before she could stop them. Not in a rush, but in the slow, defeated way of a woman who has been holding something back for months and has finally run out of the strength to keep holding. "He came to me in July," she said. "Derek. He sat in this kitchen in that chair you're sitting in right now, and he told me that you were showing signs of decline, that he was worried, that he wanted to make sure we were protected." Her voice cracked on the word protected. I believed him, Walt. God help me, I believed him at first. And then, I kept my voice level, even. I was working very hard to keep it that way. Then he told me what he needed me to do. She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment, steadying herself. The doctor's appointments, he said Schultz was a specialist, that he needed to document what was happening for our own protection. I thought it was legitimate. She stopped, swallowed. I didn't know what Schultz was writing in those files. I swear to you, Walt. I didn't know until much later. When did you find out? September. The word came out ragged. I saw one of the reports on Derek's desk when I was helping Stacy clear the dining table after dinner. I read it, and Her voice broke entirely. She pressed both hands over her face, and her shoulders shook with a grief so deep and physical it was painful to watch. I confronted Derek that same night. I told him I wouldn't do it anymore, that it had gone too far. I felt something tighten in my chest, not softening exactly, but the recognition of a woman who had made a terrible choice and had known it had tried to stop it, and had discovered too late that she was in something she couldn't simply step out of. What did he say? I asked. Maggie dropped her hands from her face. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks wet, but she looked at me directly. The first time in weeks she'd looked at me without looking away. He said that if I stopped cooperating, he would have me declared incompetent too. Her voice steadied with anger now, a cold and specific anger. He said he had enough documentation from Schultz to do it, that he would move both of us into managed care and contest the estate, and I would never see Cody again. She pressed her lips together so hard they went white. He used our grandson Walt. He used that little boy as a threat against his own mother. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. I looked at this woman, my wife of 41 years, the woman who had raised our son, who had built a life alongside me, with patience and steadiness and genuine love, and I tried to find a place inside me where what she'd done and what had been done to her could exist at the same time without tearing me apart. It was the hardest thing I had done in 72 years. "I should have come to you," Maggie said. Her voice was raw. "The moment he walked into this kitchen in July, I should have told you. Instead, I was afraid and I was stupid, and I let that fear make me into someone I am not." A sob broke through. "I am so sorry, Walt. I am so deeply, deeply sorry." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Not to comfort her, not yet. I wasn't there yet. But because 41 years meant something, and the woman across from me was not the enemy, and I needed her to know I understood the difference. "I know," I said quietly. She turned her hand over and gripped mine with both of hers, and she cried properly, fully, the way people cry when they've stopped pretending. I sat with her and let her because there was nothing else to do. After a long while, she wiped her face and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her in months, clear, direct, resolved. "There's something I want to give you," she said. "Not tonight. I need a few more days to make sure it's complete." She tightened her grip on my hand. "But when I give it to you, Walt, it will help. I promise you that." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded once slowly. Whatever she was holding on to, she would give it when she was ready. And something in the way she said it, the steadiness underneath the grief, told me it was going to matter. Derek dropped Cody off at our house that Saturday afternoon. With the same easy wave from the car window he always used, arm out 2 fingers, lifted the casual gesture of a man who had no idea his 6-year-old son was about to unravel everything he'd spent months constructing. I was in the front yard raking leaves when the car pulled up. Cody came tumbling out of the back seat before the vehicle had fully stopped, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing against his shoulders, already talking before his feet hit the pavement. "Grandpa, can we build the big train set? The one with the mountain tunnel?" "Psikur stampo sims." "We can build whatever you want, buddy," I said, catching him as he launched himself forward. I held him for a moment, that solid, warm, uncomplicated weight of a child who trusts you completely, and something in my chest ached with a ferocity I hadn't expected. Derek's car was already pulling away. Inside, Maggie had set out apple juice and the animal crackers Cody liked. She was moving around the kitchen with a brightness that was half genuine and half performance, the kind of cheerfulness a woman puts on when she's determined not to let her grief infect the room. She ruffled Cody's hair when he ran in, and he beamed up at her with the absolute uncritical love that children give before the world teaches them to qualify it. "Hey, Grandma, can I have the ones shaped like elephants first?" "You can have every elephant in the box," Maggie told him, and her voice only wobbled the tiniest bit. We built the train set on the living room floor, the big one with the wooden mountain tunnel, and the 3 bridges and the complicated switching yard that took me 15 minutes to remember how to assemble. Cody narrated the entire construction process with the authority of a project foreman, directing my hands with small, imperious gestures and correcting me twice when I put the tracks in the wrong order. "No, Grandpa, the red bridge comes before the blue one. That's the rule." "My apologies," I said seriously. "I'll remember that." "You always forget," he said cheerfully without looking up. "That's okay, though. I'll remind you." The words landed differently than he meant them. I kept my face neutral and kept building. We had the train running for about 20 minutes, Cody lying on his stomach, chin propped on his fists, watching the engine go round and round with an expression of pure contentment when he said, still watching the train, in the conversational tone children use when they're not thinking about what they're saying at all, "Grandpa, did Daddy show you the pictures yet?" "It's behind the banwar sets van smore." I kept my eyes on the track. "What pictures, buddy?" "The ones on his phone." Cody rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. "Of the place with the white beds. He showed me on a Sunday. He said it's where people go when their brain gets tired." He tilted his head, genuinely curious. "Does your brain get tired, Grandpa?" My hands rested on the track in front of me, perfectly still. "My brain feels just fine," I said carefully. "Did Daddy say anything else about those pictures?" Cody scrunched his nose the way he did when he was trying to remember something. "He said that after you go there, our house is going to be bigger, because we'd move in." He paused. "He said it would be like an adventure." Another pause, shorter, and then something shifted in his face, a small cloud of uncertainty crossing it. "But Grandpa, I don't want an adventure if you're not there." From the kitchen doorway, I heard Maggie make a sound, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, like someone who has just been struck somewhere tender. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Cody. "Did Daddy tell you not to mention the pictures?" I asked. Cody's face fell immediately guilty and troubled. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice dropping. "He said it was a surprise, and surprises are secret." He looked at me with eyes full of the particular misery of a child who has just realized he's broken a rule. "Did I do something wrong, Grandpa? Are you mad?" I moved toward him, closing the distance between us on the floor, and I put both arms around him and pulled him in. He came without hesitation, pressing his face against my shoulder, the way he'd done since he was an infant. "You did nothing wrong," I told him, my voice as steady as I could make it with my throat closing up the way it was. "Not one single thing. You hear me?" "Okay," he said, muffled against my shirt. Then, "Grandpa, you're squeezing kinda hard." "Hey, sorry, buddy." I loosened my arms but didn't let go entirely. Behind me, I heard Maggie cross the kitchen floor. I heard the sound of her pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily, and then the quiet, helpless sound of a woman crying in a room where she's trying very hard not to be heard. Cody pulled back and looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Is Grandma okay?" "She's going to be fine," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups just get a little overwhelmed. It doesn't mean anything is wrong." He considered this with the grave seriousness of a 6-year-old processing a complex emotional concept. Then he patted my arm twice with great authority and said, "I'll make her feel better. Watch." He scrambled up and ran to the kitchen, and I heard him say brightly, "Grandma, do you want to watch the train go through the tunnel? It's really fast. It always makes me feel better." Maggie's crying shifted into something that was half sob and half broken laugh. "I would love that," she said, her voice thick and unsteady. "I would absolutely love that." I stayed on the living room floor for a moment, one hand resting on the wooden train track, the October light coming through the front window, lying warm and indifferent across the floor around me. Derek had shown his 6-year-old son photographs of a nursing home. He had told that child it would be an adventure. He had built a story for Cody's benefit, a clean, simple, consequence-free version of what he was doing, because even my son apparently could not look directly at what he was doing without needing to dress it in something more bearable. I got up from the floor, I went to the kitchen. I sat at the table and watched Cody describe the train tunnel to Maggie with enormous enthusiasm, and I listened and I let the sound of his voice fill the room completely. Derek picked Cody up at 6. He pulled into the driveway, and when Cody ran out to the car, Derek looked across the yard toward the porch where I was standing. He held my gaze for just a moment. No wave this time. No easy gesture. Just a look. Then he reached over and opened the passenger door for Cody, and the car backed out without another glance in my direction. After the taillights disappeared around the corner, Maggie stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, holding herself together with both hands. Her eyes were dry now, but the redness around them gave her away entirely. "Walt," she said, "I'm almost ready." "I know," I said. That evening, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A message from Carol Simmons sent at 8:47, 10 days, Walt. "I need you in my office tomorrow morning. It's time to talk about final strategy. Bring everything you have." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I'll be there at 9. 10 days. The hearing was 10 days away, and whatever Maggie was holding on to, she was going to need to give it to me soon. Carol's conference table had never looked quite like that before. Spread end to end with documents, photographs, printed transcripts, and evidence logs organized into 6 labeled folders, each one representing a different category of what Derek Harmon had spent months building against his own father. Carol stood at the head of the table, reading glasses on coffee, going cold at her elbow, moving through each folder with the systematic focus of a woman who had converted chaos into arguments for 3 decades. "Walk me through all of it," she said. "Out loud, every piece. I want to hear how it sounds when you say it together." I pulled the first folder toward me. "The medical records," I said. 8 months of fabricated documentation from Dr. Raymond Schultz diagnosing me with progressive cognitive decline. Rebecca Moss's forensic analysis confirms the records were constructed to build a paper trail, not to document actual symptoms. Carol made a note. "Next, the Ring camera footage from Dorothy Calloway's property." I opened the second folder. 7 days of time-stamped video showing Maggie arriving each morning, Gerald Fitch and Marcus Webb entering the house for undisclosed meetings, Dr. Schultz present on 2 occasions, and Derek signing documents with a real estate agent present. Dorothy has agreed to testify as an independent witness. She's confirmed that in writing. "It's signed and notarized," I said. "I picked it up from her yesterday." Carol nodded, and something in her expression sharpened with approval. "Continue. The bank records." I slid the third folder across. $47,300 withdrawn from our joint account over 4 months in increments specifically structured to stay below the federal currency transaction report threshold. Janet Reeves at First National has flagged the pattern in writing as potential structuring under the Bank Secrecy Act. Audio recordings. Carol said before I could move to the 4th folder, and the way she said it told me she considered this the strongest single piece. 14 recordings from Cody's smartwatch. My voice steadied itself. Derek coaching his 6-year-old son to tell people that his grandfather forgets things, gets angry, is dangerous. The child's own voice on the recordings contradicting the script he's being given, saying, "I never scared him," saying I remembered his birthday, saying, "I make him pancakes." I paused. The contrast between what Derek was telling Cody to say and what Cody actually knew to be true makes the intent undeniable. Carol set down her pen. "It also makes it human," she said quietly. "Judges are lawyers, but they're also people. Those recordings are going to matter in ways that go beyond evidentiary weight." She picked her pen back up. The pharmacy report. Phil Garrett's written analysis supported by the pharmacy's own surveillance footage. 5th folder. My blood pressure medication was replaced with furosemide, a loop diuretic that combined with my existing digoxin prescription could have caused severe hypotensive episodes. The pharmacy camera shows Derek at the counter on a date when I was out of the house. Detective Ray Colby of the Savannah-Chatham Metro Police has an active investigation open. And the forgery. Rebecca Moss's forensic report. I opened the last folder. The signature on the will Gerald Fitch submitted to the probate court was digitally extracted from a bank document I signed in March 2019 and transplanted onto the will before printing. Federal document fraud, chapter and verse. Carol closed the last folder and stood back from the table. She took off her reading glasses and looked at me with the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things in 30 years and was recalibrating the scale. "Walter Harmon," she said, You have built a stronger case against your own son than most prosecutors build with a full team and a 6-month timeline. Her voice carried no congratulation in it, just the level factual acknowledgement of something she was genuinely impressed by. Dorothy Calloway is coming in at 2 this afternoon to review her witness statement. Rebecca Moss has filed her forensic report with the federal district office. Detective Colby's evidence submission goes to the DA's office on Friday. She paused. We are ready. There may be one more thing, I said. Carol raised an eyebrow. Maggie. I looked at the folders on the table. She told me almost 2 weeks ago she had something to give me. She said when the time was right. I met Carol's eyes. I think the time is right. Carol studied me for a moment. Do you trust her? The question sat there honest and direct, the way Carol's questions always were. I trust that she's been living with this long enough to know what it costs, I said. And I trust that whatever she's been collecting, she's been careful with it. Dorothy arrived at 2 o'clock, exactly white hair, fleece vest. The same unhurried certainty she'd had the morning she called me across the street from her front porch. She sat down at Carol's conference table and reviewed her witness statement. Line by line, without flinching. Every word is accurate, she said when she'd finished. She signed the bottom without hesitation. I've lived on that block for 34 years. I know what I saw. Mrs. Calloway. Carol said, there's a possibility you'll be called to testify at the hearing in person. Are you prepared for that? Dorothy looked at Carol the way a woman looks at a question she considers mildly insulting. I'm 70 years old, she said. I've testified before a planning commission, a neighborhood zoning board, and once at a traffic dispute that went on for 4 hours. A probate hearing doesn't frighten me. I drove home from Carol's office that evening with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, not yet, but the solid, specific feeling of a structure that has been properly built. Every beam in place, every load point accounted for. Maggie was waiting in the kitchen. She had a small black USB drive on the table in front of her, and her hands were folded around it the way people hold something they've carried a long way. Sit down, Walt, she said. I sat. She looked at her hands on the tablecloth for a long moment. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. There's something I'm putting together, she said quietly. For you. I need a few more days to make sure it's complete and right. She pressed her lips together. When I give it to you, Walt, it will help. I promise you that. I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't push. Okay, I said, when you're ready. She nodded once slowly and looked back down at the table. The kitchen was very quiet around us. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8 when Maggie finally came home. I heard her key scrape the lock, that familiar hesitation she always had when she knew something heavy was waiting on the other side of a door. I was sitting in my armchair by the window, the same chair I'd spent 40 years reading blueprints in, and I kept my hands folded on my knees like I was holding myself together from the outside in. She stepped inside and saw me. Her breath caught. I heard it from across the room. Walt. Her voice cracked right down the middle of my name. You're still up. I made coffee, I said. Sit down, Maggie. She didn't argue. She crossed the living room, slowly, her coat still on her purse, clutched against her chest like a shield. When she lowered herself onto the couch across from me, her hands were trembling so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs to make them stop. I've been waiting for you to come to me, I said. I told myself I'd give you time, but time's running out, sweetheart. Her chin wobbled. Walt, let me finish. I kept my voice steady even though my chest felt like something enormous was pressing down on it from the inside. I know about the withdrawals. I know about the fake medical reports. I know about Gerald Fitch and the power of attorney that was never mine to sign. I know about Phil's pharmacy and the pills that weren't my pills. I exhaled slowly. And I know Derek threatened you. Maggie's face crumpled, not slowly all at once like a paper house in the rain. Her eyes flooded over, and she pressed both hands to her mouth to catch the sound that came out of her. Something between a sob and a moan that cut right through me like a cold blade. Oh, Walt, she breathed. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize yet, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Just talk to me, the way you used to, like we're the only 2 people left in the world. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and drew a shuddering breath. He came to me in August, she started. Derek, he sat right where you're sitting and he said you were getting worse, that you'd left the stove on twice, that you'd forgotten where you parked the car. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and raw. Walt, he said things that sounded so real. He was my son. I wanted to believe he was worried about you, not planning to take everything I've built, I finished quietly. She flinched like I'd raised a hand to her, though I never once in 41 years raised a hand to this woman. He said the nursing home would be better. He said you'd be safe. He said we'd still visit. Her voice broke again. And then he showed me the paperwork and told me that if I didn't help him get your signature, he'd tell everyone I had dementia too, that I'd been confused, that I'd been making financial decisions without your knowledge. She was shaking now, full-body tremors that rattled her pearl earrings. He had documents, Walt, fabricated ones. He said he'd use them against me if I didn't cooperate. My jaw was tight enough to ache. He threatened to bury you right alongside me. Yes, the word came out barely above a whisper. I stood up. Not because I was angry at her. I wasn't not anymore. I walked to the couch and sat beside her, and I took both of her trembling hands in mine. Her fingers were ice cold. Maggie, I waited until she looked at me. I need you to tell me everything, every meeting, every phone call, every document he put in front of you. Can you do that? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded hard, determined like she was fighting through quicksand to reach solid ground. There's something else, she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small USB flash drive, black no bigger than my thumbnail, with a strip of blue tape across the top, where she'd written one word in her careful schoolteacher handwriting, truth. My throat closed. I recorded everything, she said, her voice gaining a fragile, desperate strength. Every conversation Derek had with me in this house, every phone call I could catch on speaker. The night Gerald Fitch came here, I had my phone running in my coat pocket. She pressed the drive into my palm and curled my fingers around it. It's all on there. His voice, his words, everything he said he'd do to you. Her eyes searched mine, flooding again. I was a coward for too long, Walt, but I kept this. I kept every single thing because some part of me knew I'd need to give it back to you someday. I looked down at the USB in my hand. Such a small thing to hold so much weight. Why tonight? I asked, my voice rough with everything I wasn't letting myself feel yet. Why not a week ago, a month ago? Maggie's lip quivered. Because Carol Simmons called me this afternoon. She let out a wet, broken laugh. She told me the hearing was in 4 days. And she told me, she said, Mrs. Harmon, your husband is going into that courtroom with or without you. The only question is which side of the room you want to stand on. The air went out of me. And I thought, Maggie's voice fractured completely. I thought about 43 years, about the house you built with your own 2 hands, about the way you still leave my coffee on the counter every single morning before I'm even awake. She was crying openly now, her shoulders heaving. I thought this man has never once stopped choosing me, and I've been letting our son use me to destroy him. I put my arms around her. She pressed her face into my shoulder and sobbed hard, ugly, desperate sobs that soaked through my shirt. I held her and stared at the USB in my right hand and felt something in my chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite relief, but lived somewhere painfully between the two. We're going to be all right, I told her, though. My own eyes were burning something fierce. But I need you with me, Maggie, not behind me, with me. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her face wet and broken, and more honest than it had been in months. I'll be there, she said fiercely. Every step. I closed my hand tighter around the USB drive. 4 days. I had 4 days, 6 evidence files, one wife who had just found her courage, and a son who had no idea the walls were already closing in. Carol Simmons' office smelled like old mahogany and fresh legal pads, the kind of room where serious things got decided and nobody pretended otherwise. I arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes early, because that's what my father always told me. If you're not early, you're already losing. I set Maggie's USB drive on Carol's desk the moment I sat down, right next to the manila folder of bank statements and the pharmacy report Phil Garrett had signed in his own hand. Carol picked up the USB and turned it over twice. Her reading glasses were perched at the end of her nose, and her silver hair was pulled back in the kind of knot that meant she'd already been working for 2 hours before I arrived. Maggie recorded it herself, she asked. Every conversation, every phone call she could catch. I leaned forward, both elbows on her desk. Derek threatened her, told her he had fabricated paperwork that would make it look like she'd been managing finances without my knowledge. He was going to use her as a weapon against me, and if she didn't comply, he'd bury her with me. Carol set the drive down carefully and pulled up her laptop. Walt, if this audio is clean, no background distortion that compromises clarity, no gaps that a defense attorney could argue suggest editing, this changes everything. Her eyes met mine over the rim of her glasses. This moves the needle from civil guardianship dispute into criminal territory, elder coercion, conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially wire fraud, if any of those conversations involve phone calls across county lines. My pulse kicked hard. How criminal are we talking? Derek could be looking at 5 to 10 years minimum if the DA decides to pursue it aggressively. She tapped the USB. And based on what Rebecca Moss already confirmed about the forged signature, the DA will want this case. It's clean, it's documented, and it's outrageous enough to make headlines. She paused, then softened slightly. That last part matters in a courtroom, Walt. Juries respond to outrage. A knock at the door. Carol called out, "Come in," and Agent Rebecca Moss stepped into the office. She was carrying a leather portfolio and a sealed evidence bag that held the original power of attorney. Document the one with Derek's cut-and-paste forgery of my signature. She looked exactly as she always did, composed, precise, the kind of calm that came from spending years in rooms where falling apart wasn't an option. "Morning, Walt." She set the portfolio on the table and unzipped it with practiced efficiency. "I finished the secondary analysis last night. I want to walk you both through the findings before the hearing." "Please," I said. She laid 3 photographs side by side. The first was a scan of the forged POA signature. The second was a copy of my actual signature from a 2019 bank loan document. The third was a magnified side-by-side comparison, annotated with numbered markers in red. "Marker 1, she said, pointing to the upper loop of my capital W. "In every authentic document we've tested, and I pulled 14 going back to 1998, your W has a consistent entry stroke that starts below the baseline and curves up. The forged signature starts above the baseline. That's not a stylistic variation. That's a different hand." She moved to the next marker. "Marker 2, the crossbar on your T. Yours is a single fluid motion, slightly right-leaning. The forgery shows a stop and restart mid-stroke, which is consistent with someone tracing or copying from a printed reference. Derek had access to documents with my signature." I said, my voice flat. "Probably pulled something from the filing cabinet when he was here in September." "That's our working assumption," Rebecca confirmed. The VSC imaging also revealed an impression on the back of the page. Someone wrote over the signature line with light pressure, first practicing before committing the final mark. She tapped the sealed evidence bag. "This document is a fraud, Walt, on 4 separate technical bases. I'll be testifying to all of them under oath." Something in my chest loosened, not relief, not yet. More like a beam settling into the right position after years of being slightly off-center. I pressed my knuckles against my mouth for a moment and breathed. "Are you all right?" Carol asked quietly. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm ready. There's a difference." She reached across the desk and covered my hand with hers, briefly a gesture so unexpectedly warm from a woman who dealt in clauses and statutes that it nearly undid me. "You've done the hard work, Walt. You walked into that fire alone and you didn't flinch." I had help," I said, thinking of Dorothy's front porch and Phil's pharmacy counter, and Maggie's cold hands around that little black USB drive. Rebecca began organizing the evidence photographs back into labeled sleeves. "I'll have everything submitted to the court clerk by 3 o'clock today. Chain of custody is documented. The pharmacy report, the audio files from the USB Dorothy Calloway's camera footage, the bank structuring records, all of it will be entered as exhibits before the judge even calls the room to order." "Oh, what's Derek going to do when he walks in tomorrow and sees all of it?" I asked. Carol answered without hesitation. "He's going to look at Gerald Fitch and realize his lawyer didn't protect him nearly as well as he thought." A cool, precise smile crossed her face. "And Gerald Fitch is going to have some very difficult questions to answer about his role in drafting that guardianship petition." I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for one long moment, at the plaster molding that ringed the old office light fixture, at the cracks that time had made in something solid. I knew how that felt. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," Carol confirmed. "Chatham County Courthouse, Judge Harold Brennan presiding, 9 a.m. I stood buttoned to my jacket and picked up my copy of the evidence folder. My hands were steady. They had not shaken once during this entire meeting, and I was proud of that, in the quiet way a man is proud of things nobody else notices. "Then I'll see you at 8:45, I said. Carol nodded. "Don't be late." "I'm never late," I told her. I walked out of that office and into the pale November morning, the kind of Savannah day where the live oaks hold their breath and the air smells like salt and coming rain. I had one night left. Before everything I'd built my name, my home, my 41 years of honest living would either be protected or lost. I wasn't afraid. I was a 72-year-old engineer who had spent his entire career making sure the structures he built did not fall. Tomorrow I intended to prove that included myself. The courthouse on Montgomery Street had stood for over 100 years, and walking through its front doors that morning, I understood why people built things to last. Some structures needed to outlive the storms that tested them. I wore my Navy suit, the same one I'd worn to every significant moment of my adult life. Maggie walked beside me, her hand threaded through my arm, her grip so tight I could feel her pulse racing against my forearm. She hadn't slept. Neither had I. But we'd sat up together at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, drinking decaf and talking, really talking, the way we hadn't in months. And that felt like its own kind of victory before the day even started. Carol Simmons was waiting on the courthouse steps, her leather briefcase in one hand and a calm on her face that I'd paid good money to rent for the day. She looked at me, then at Maggie, and something warm crossed her expression. "You both came," she said. "We both came," Maggie said firmly and squeezed my arm harder. Inside, courtroom 4. Judge Harold Brennan was a compact man in his mid-60s with silver eyebrows thick enough to cast shadows, and a reputation Carol had told me for zero tolerance of wasted time. He called the room to order at 9:02, and the air inside went tight as a drum. Derek sat at the petitioner's table, with Gerald Fitch beside him. I hadn't seen my son in 3 weeks. He looked thinner than I remembered, and his jaw was set at an angle that told me he'd convinced himself he still had control of this room. Gerald Fitch had a yellow legal pad in front of him, and was writing something with the focused calm of a man who didn't know yet that his foundation had cracked. "We're here on the matter of a guardianship petition, filed by Derek Allen Harmon." Judge Brennan said, "Regarding one Walter James Harmon, counsel, you may proceed." Gerald Fitch stood. "Your Honor, the petitioner contends that Mr. Walter Harmon has exhibited a pattern of cognitive decline over the preceding 8 months, as documented by..." "Your Honor." Carol was on her feet before Fitch finished his sentence. "Respondent requests permission to present preliminary evidence challenging the validity of both the petition and the supporting documentation." Judge Brennan looked at her over his reading glasses. "You have something substantive, Ms. Simmons. 6 exhibits, Your Honor, including forensic analysis audio recordings and third-party witness testimony." A muscle jumped in Derek's jaw. He leaned toward Fitch and whispered something sharp. Fitch's pen stopped moving. "Proceed," the judge said. Carol moved like she'd been rehearsing this for 40 years. First came Rebecca Moss, who took the stand in a charcoal blazer, her credentials entering the record with the quiet authority of a woman who had testified in federal courts before this one was built. She laid out the VSC analysis in plain language, the entry stroke discrepancy, the stop and restart mid-forgery, the impression marks of practice strokes on the back of the POA document. "Agent Moss," Carol said, "in your professional opinion, is the signature on this power of attorney document authentic as it was here?" "It is not," Rebecca said, her voice carrying cleanly to every corner of the room. "This signature was fabricated by an individual copying from a reference document. It is a forgery." Derek's hand hit the table. "That is a lie." "Mr. Harmon," Judge Brennan's voice dropped 10 degrees. "You will control yourself in my courtroom." Derek's face had gone the color of old chalk. Fitch put a hand on his arm, but Derek shook it off like it burned him. Next came Dorothy Calloway's camera footage projected onto a screen beside the judge's bench, crisp, time-stamped damning. Gerald Fitch arriving on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. Marcus Webb's silver Audi in the driveway. Dr. Raymond Schultz carrying a manila folder that had my name printed on the tab. "Your Honor," Carol said, "the respondent will demonstrate that Dr. Schultz produced fabricated medical assessments for financial compensation at the direction of the petitioner for the express purpose of manufacturing grounds for this guardianship claim." Fitch was on his feet. Objection. This is speculative and inflammatory. I have a signed statement from Dr. Schultz, Carroll said, holding up a document sealed in a clear evidence sleeve, in which he acknowledges accepting $15,000 in exchange for falsifying cognitive assessment records for Walter Harmon. The statement was provided voluntarily to Agent Moss of the FBI 2 days ago and submitted to this court's clerk yesterday morning as Exhibit 4. Counsel for the petitioner was served a copy at that time. The room cracked open. I heard Maggie make a sound beside me, not a sob, but a sharp exhale of something that had been held too long. I reached over and covered her hand with mine, without looking away from my son. Derek was staring at Fitch. His lips were moving, but nothing was coming out. And then, Gerald Fitch did something I will remember until my last day on this earth. He closed his yellow legal pad, snapped his pen into his breast pocket, and leaned close to Derek's ear. Whatever he said, it was short. Then he straightened up, buttoned his jacket, and spoke directly to the judge. Your Honor, I must respectfully request a recess. I need to disclose an irreconcilable conflict of interest that prevents me from continuing as counsel for the petitioner. Judge Brennan studied him over the rim of his glasses for a long, silent moment. This is highly irregular, Mr. Fitch. I understand, Your Honor. I would not raise it now if I had any other option. Another silence. The judge looked at Carroll, then back at Fitch. I'll grant a 15-minute recess. If your withdrawal stands after that, Mr. Derek Harmon will be unrepresented, and we will proceed accordingly. He struck the bench once. Recess. Fitch gathered his briefcase without looking at Derek. He walked out of that courtroom and did not come back. When the recess ended, Judge Brennan confirmed the withdrawal on the record and asked Derek whether he wished to request a continuance to retain new counsel. Derek looked at me then, really looked across the room past Carroll's table straight at my face. His eyes were wet. His throat was working. He looked the way he had at 9 years old when he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball and stood on our porch waiting for the consequences he knew were coming. No, Derek said, his voice cracked and hollow. No continuance. Then Carroll played the USB audio. Derek's voice filled that courtroom calm, deliberate, utterly calculated coaching. Maggie threatening her, laying out Plan A and Plan B, with the clinical precision of a man who had convinced himself he would never be caught. Every word landed like a stone, dropping into still water. I felt Maggie trembling beside me. I put my arm around her shoulders and held on. When it ended, Judge Brennan removed his glasses and set them on the bench. I've heard enough, he said. Judge Harold Brennan ruled at 11:47 in the morning. I know the exact time, because I looked at the clock on the courtroom wall the moment he began speaking, the way you mark the second a storm finally breaks. The guardianship petition filed by Derek Allen Harmon is hereby denied on the merits. He said, his voice steady as granite. The court finds the supporting documentation to be fraudulent, the medical assessments to be fabricated for financial gain, and the actions of the petitioner to constitute elder coercion under Georgia Code, Section 30-5-8. The court's findings will be formally forwarded to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. What they choose to do with them is their jurisdiction, not mine, but I have made my view of this matter abundantly clear. He looked directly at Derek. Mr. Harmon, I strongly advise you to retain competent legal counsel before the end of today. Derek didn't move. He sat at that table alone, no lawyer, no ally, no plan left standing, and stared at the surface of the wood as though he might find something there worth holding on to. His shoulders had collapsed inward, his hands lay open and empty in his lap. I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. I felt something quieter and more painful, a grief for the boy he'd been before. Whatever hunger for money or fear of being ordinary had hollowed him out and turned him into a stranger wearing my son's face. Maggie was crying openly. Not the desperate, guilty sobs of the night before. These were different tears, the kind that come when a weight you forgot you were carrying finally drops from your shoulders. She pressed her face into my neck and her whole body shook, and I held her and let her cry because she'd earned every single tear. It's over, I told her quietly. We're still standing. Carol appeared at my elbow, composed but with a brightness in her eyes she wasn't quite hiding. Walt, she said, go home. What about... I'll handle the paperwork. I'll coordinate with the DA's office. That's what you pay me for. She smiled, warm, genuine, the smile of someone who had believed in a good outcome, even on the days I hadn't. Go home with your wife. I shook her hand. Then, because it felt right, I hugged her. She laughed surprised and patted my back twice before stepping away. Outside on the courthouse steps, the November air was sharp and clean, carrying the mineral scent of the Savannah River 2 blocks east. I stood there for a moment, with my face tilted up toward the pale winter sky, and I breathed. Christmas Eve came 4 weeks later, like a quiet benediction. I decorated the house myself that year. Nothing extravagant, just the wreath Maggie had woven from pine and dried holly berries, the same ceramic nativity set we'd used since 1987, and white lights strung along the porch railing, the way I'd done every December since we moved in. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon rolls and wood smoke from the fireplace, and standing in the front hallway that evening, I thought, this is what I nearly lost. Stacy arrived first. She knocked, didn't use her key, which told me everything about where her conscience had finally landed. And when I opened the door, her eyes were red from crying that had clearly started before she got to my porch. "Oh, Walson," she said, "I owe you more than an apology. I knew things were wrong, and I chose not to." "Come inside," I said. "It's cold." She stepped into the hallway, and I closed the door behind her, and she covered her mouth with both hands for a moment, fighting herself back into composure. "I should have protected you," she said fiercely, her voice thick. "I should have been braver. I'm so sorry." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Then be braver now. That's all anyone can ever do." Maggie came from the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron, and when she saw Stacy, she opened her arms without a word. Stacy walked into them and cried, and Maggie held her and said, "We're family. We find our way back." Then the front door opened again. Cody. He came in like he always did, at full speed, arms windmilling, wearing a Christmas sweater that lit up with actual blinking LEDs. He launched himself at me before I'd even turned all the way around, and I caught him and held him up, and he grabbed my face in both his small hands and said, "Grandpa, your cheeks are scratchy." I laughed a real laugh, the kind that starts in your chest and works its way up without asking permission. And the burning behind my eyes had nothing to do with sadness. "Your grandpa hasn't been sleeping enough to shave properly," I told him. "Mom says you were really brave." Cody said, seriously studying my face the way only a 6-year-old can, with complete and uncomplicated honesty. "She said you didn't let the bad guys win." My throat tightened so hard I had to look away for a second, out the window at the white lights on the porch railing and the dark Georgia sky above them. "Your grandpa had a lot of help," I said finally. "That's the secret, buddy. You don't fight the hard things alone. You find your people, and you hold on." Cody considered this with great seriousness, then nodded and wriggled down from my arms to chase the cat across the living room. Derek was not there that night. Some wounds need more than a season to close, and I had made my peace with that. What I had instead was Maggie humming in the kitchen and Stacy setting the table with the good china, and Cody's laughter ricocheting off every wall of the house I had built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago. Later after dinner, after Cody had fallen asleep on the couch with his shoes still on and the fireplace had burned down to a warm, steady glow, Maggie sat beside me and laid her head on my shoulder. The Christmas lights blinked softly. The old house breathed around us. "We made it," she said. I pressed my lips to the top of her head. "We made it," I agreed. I had gone into that fight with nothing but the truth and the people willing to stand beside it. I had come out the other side with my name intact, my home still standing, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that some things, the real things, the built-with-love things, cannot be taken from a man who refuses to let them go. I was 72 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I was ready for it. People ask me sometimes whether I regret the way things unfolded, whether I wish I had seen it sooner, moved faster, trusted less. My honest answer is this: I regret the years I spent building a life so focused on providing for my family that I forgot to truly see them, what they were becoming, what fears they were feeding, what choices they were quietly making behind closed doors. Don't be like me. Don't wait until someone hands you a forged signature and a bottle of wrong pills before you start paying attention to the people sitting at your own table. This was a family story I never wanted to tell. A story of family betrayal that started not with hatred, but with greed dressed up as worry. And the hardest truth I've carried out of it is that the people who hurt us most are rarely strangers. They are the ones we loved without condition and trusted without question. I'm not a preacher, but I'll say this once because it's the only thing that kept me upright on the worst nights. I believe God doesn't let a man be broken without giving him exactly the tools he needs to rebuild a neighbor's porch, Light, a pharmacist who still believes in doing. Right, a wife who finally found her courage, and a grandson who hugged my face and called me brave. That was grace. I didn't deserve it. I received it anyway. This is a family story about what survives when everything else burns away. And this family betrayal taught me that love isn't proven in the good years, it's proven in the moments you choose to stay. Confess and fight your way back to each other. If this story moved you in any way, if you saw a piece of your own life somewhere in these 18 chapters, drop a comment below and tell me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, because the stories we bring you are always worth staying for. Thank you so much for following this story all the way to the end. It means more than words can say. And a gentle reminder, the stories coming up contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and life lessons. If that's not the content for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what speaks to your heart. But if you're staying, we're glad you're here.